A lone figure huddled against the biting wind. Catherine Campbell fought to keep her eyes open as another gust of snow blinded her. The unforgiving peaks of the Black Hills looming like sentinels of doom around her. The November of 1879 had brought an early winter to South Dakota, crueler than any she had known in her 23 years of life. Catherine stumbled, her frozen fingers clutching the remnants of a tattered shawl around her shoulders. 4 days. It had been 4 days since the stagecoach accident. 4 days of wandering through an endless maze of pine and rock, the bodies of her fellow passengers and the driver left behind in a ravine that now seemed a lifetime away. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself, her cracked lips bleeding from the cold. "Someone will find you." But as night descended once more and the temperature plummeted further, Catherine knew the lie in her words. No one was looking for her. No one in Hill City even knew she had been on that stagecoach. She had been traveling to start anew, to escape the scandal that had followed her from Boston after she had refused the advances of her employer's son. Her legs finally gave way beneath her, and she collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine. The snow had stopped falling, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by her labored breathing. As consciousness began to slip away, she thought she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. A hallucination, surely. One last cruel trick of her dying mind. Catherine closed her eyes, surrendering to the cold embrace that promised an end to her suffering. Miles Ironwood had not planned to take the high mountain trail back to his ranch. The usual path through the valley would have been quicker, safer in the dying light of day. But something intuition, or perhaps divine intervention, had urged him to climb higher, to push his stallion Thunder through the fresh snow. At 32, Miles had learned to trust his instincts. 8 years of ranging these mountains had taught him that survival often depended on listening to that quiet voice inside, the voice that now told him to pause, to scan the tree line ahead. "What is it, boy?" he murmured as Thunder snorted, pawing at the ground. The horse's ears were pricked forward, alert to something Miles couldn't yet see. Then he spotted it, a splash of color against the pristine white, half concealed by the shadows of a massive pine. Dismounting quickly, Miles trudged through knee-deep snow, his hand instinctively resting on the revolver at his hip. What he found stopped his heart cold. A woman, nearly blue with cold, her dark hair crusted with ice, lay slumped against the tree. For a moment, Miles thought he had stumbled upon another victim of the mountain's cruelty, a corpse to be buried come spring thaw. Then he saw the faintest puff of breath escape her lips, visible in the frigid air. "Madam." Miles knelt beside her, pulling off his glove to touch her cheek. She was ice cold but alive. Barely. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Miles didn't waste another second. He shrugged out of his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her slight form before lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this half-frozen stranger. "Hold on," he whispered, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just hold on." With careful movements, Miles mounted Thunder, cradling the woman against his chest. The temperature was dropping by the minute, and his ranch was still a good hour's ride away. He couldn't let her die, not when fate had led him to her. "Come on, Thunder," he urged, turning the horse toward home. "She needs shelter, and fast." As they descended through the gathering darkness, Miles found himself praying for the first time in years, praying that this unknown woman would survive the night, that he hadn't found her too late. The journey down the mountain seemed eternal. Miles kept one arm firmly around Catherine's waist, holding her secure against him as Thunder picked his way carefully along the treacherous path. He could feel her shallow breaths against his chest, each one a small victory against death. "Stay with me," he murmured into her ice-crusted hair. Just a little longer. When the lights of his ranch finally appeared through the trees, Miles nearly wept with relief. His foreman, Jeremiah, must have spotted them approaching, for the older man came running from the barn, lantern held high. "Mr. Ironwood." "What in tarnation?" "Found her half frozen up in the high pass," Miles explained, his voice rough from the cold. "Help me get her inside, quick." Together, they carried Catherine's limp form into the main house, a sturdy two-story structure that Miles had built with his own hands after striking silver 3 years earlier. The warmth of the fireplace hit them as they entered, a blessed contrast to the bitter cold outside. "Put her by the fire," Miles instructed, already moving toward the hearth in the sitting room. "And fetch Mrs. Holloway. Tell her to bring warm blankets and whatever else she needs." Jeremiah nodded and hurried off to find the housekeeper, while Miles gently laid Catherine on the bearskin rug before the roaring fire. He removed his coat from around her and was alarmed to find her clothes damp with melting snow. She would never warm up this way, Mrs. Holloway bustled in moments later, her usually stern face creased with concern. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, taking in the scene. "The poor child is half dead." "Can you help her?" Miles asked, standing back to give the housekeeper room to work. "I'll need to get these wet things off her, Mrs. Holloway said, already untying the woman's frozen bootlaces. "You fetch that bottle of whiskey from your study and heat some water. We need to warm her from the inside out." Miles did as instructed, grateful for the housekeeper's calm efficiency. When he returned with the whiskey, Mrs. Holloway had already stripped Catherine of her sodden outer garments and wrapped her in warm blankets. "Hold her up so I can get some of this down her," the older woman directed, uncorking the bottle. Miles knelt beside Catherine, gently lifting her upper body against his chest. Her head lolled back against his shoulder, and he was struck by how young she looked, how vulnerable. Mrs. Holloway carefully tipped a small amount of whiskey between Catherine's parted lips. After a moment, the woman coughed weakly, a good sign that she was responsive. "That's it, Mrs. Holloway murmured approvingly. "She's fighting." Through the night, they worked in shifts to keep Catherine warm. Miles built up the fire to a roaring blaze and placed heated stones wrapped in flannel around her. Mrs. Holloway prepared a broth, managing to get a few spoonfuls into Catherine whenever she showed signs of consciousness. By dawn, color had returned to her cheeks, though she remained in a state between sleep and wakefulness. Miles, exhausted from his vigil, found himself studying her face in the morning light. She was beautiful, with delicate features and long, dark lashes that rested against her now flushed cheeks. Who was she? What had brought her alone to the mountains in winter? "You should rest, Mr. Ironwood," Mrs. Holloway said, entering with a fresh pot of coffee. "You've been up all night." Miles shook his head. "I want to be here when she wakes. She'll be frightened, not knowing where she is." The housekeeper gave him a knowing look but didn't argue. "As you wish. I'll have a proper breakfast ready when you're both ready for it." Left alone with the sleeping woman, Miles settled into a chair he'd pulled close to the makeshift bed they'd created on the floor by the hearth. Despite his intention to stay awake, exhaustion soon claimed him, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep. He woke to the sensation of being watched. Opening his eyes, Miles found himself looking into the most striking blue eyes he had ever seen. The woman was awake, propped slightly up on one elbow, regarding him with equal parts fear and curiosity. "You're safe," he said immediately, keeping his voice gentle. "My name is Miles Ironwood. I found you in the mountains yesterday evening." Catherine tried to speak, but her voice emerged as a painful croak. Miles quickly poured water from a nearby pitcher and helped her drink. "Thank you," she managed after a few sips, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Catherine, Catherine Campbell. Miss Campbell, Miles acknowledged with a slight nod. You're at my ranch about 15 miles outside of Hill City. Can you tell me what happened? How you came to be alone in the mountains? Catherine closed her eyes briefly, the memory clearly painful. The stagecoach. We hit ice on the road. It went over the edge, everyone else. Her voice broke, and she didn't need to finish the sentence for Miles to understand. When was this? He asked, calculating in his mind how long she might have been wandering. 4 days ago, I think. I lost track. Tears welled in her eyes, and Miles instinctively reached out to take her hand. You survived, he said firmly. That's what matters now. Rest and regain your strength. You're welcome to stay here as long as needed. Catherine seemed about to say more when Mrs. Holloway entered with a tray of food. The smell of fresh bread and bacon filled the room, and to Miles's relief, Catherine's expression brightened slightly at the sight. You must be starving, dear, the housekeeper said, setting down the tray. Let's get some food in you. The best medicine there is, I always say. Over the next few days, Catherine's strength gradually returned. Mrs. Holloway provided her with clothing, simple dresses that had belonged to Miles's sister during her last visit, and helped her bathe and wash the grime from her hair. Miles, meanwhile, rode to Hill City to inform the authorities about the stagecoach accident and to inquire whether anyone was searching for Catherine. No one's reported her missing, Sheriff Taylor told him over a cup of coffee in the town's only cafe. The stagecoach company knew something was wrong when it didn't arrive on schedule, but with the heavy snow, they figured it was just delayed. There are bodies up there, Miles said grimly. They'll need to be recovered. The sheriff nodded solemnly. I'll organize a party when the weather clears. What about the lady? What are your plans for her? Miles hadn't thought that far ahead. She's still recovering. I suppose once she's well enough, she'll want to continue to wherever she was headed. And where might that be? The sheriff asked, eyebrow raised. Miles realized he didn't know. In their brief conversations, Catherine had shared little about herself or her destination. He made a mental note to ask her upon his return. The ride back to the ranch gave Miles time to think. There was something about Catherine Campbell that intrigued him beyond her mysterious appearance in the mountains. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite her circumstances. Or the flash of intelligence in her eyes when they discussed books during their evening conversations by the fire. Whatever it was, Miles found himself looking forward to learning more about her. When he arrived home, he found Catherine in the kitchen with Mrs. Holloway, her sleeves rolled up as she helped knead bread dough. The domestic scene struck him in an unexpected way. His house had never felt like a home until that moment. Mr. Ironwood, Catherine smiled when she noticed him in the doorway, quickly wiping flour from her hands onto an apron. We didn't expect you back until tomorrow. The weather was favorable, he replied, hanging his hat on a peg. I see you're feeling better. Much, she agreed. Mrs. Holloway has been teaching me to bake. I'm afraid I wasn't much use in the kitchen back in Boston. It was the first detail she had volunteered about her past. Miles filed it away, along with the observation that she spoke with the refined accent of someone well-educated. I spoke with the sheriff, he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway. They'll send a party to recover the others when the weather permits. Catherine's smile faded, grief shadowing her face. They were kind people. The driver had 7 children, he told me. Miles nodded, understanding her sorrow. The sheriff also mentioned that no one has reported you missing. Were you expected somewhere? Is there someone I should send word to that you're safe? A flicker of something fear crossed Catherine's features before she composed herself. No, she said quietly. There's no one waiting for me. Miles didn't press further, sensing her reluctance to elaborate. Instead, he changed the subject. The bread smells wonderful. I haven't had fresh baked bread in months. Catherine's grateful smile told him he'd made the right decision in not pushing for answers. There would be time for that later, when she was ready to share her story. That evening, after a dinner where Catherine had proudly served the bread she had helped bake, they sat before the fire in what had become their nightly ritual. Miles found himself watching her as she gazed into the flames, her profile illuminated by the golden light. "May I ask where you were headed?" he finally ventured. Before the accident, Catherine looked up, her blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Hill City, actually. I had arranged for a position as a schoolteacher there." Miles was surprised. "The town's been trying to hire a teacher for months." "The last one left to get married in the summer." "Yes, that's what I understood from the correspondence," Catherine confirmed. "I have experience teaching in Boston, and when I saw the advertisement—" She trailed off, and Miles sensed there was more to her story than a simple desire for a change of scenery. "Hill City will be glad to have you," he said after a moment. "Once you're fully recovered, of course. The children have been running wild without proper schooling." Catherine smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, and for your kindness, Mr. Ironwood. I would have died up there if you hadn't found me." "Miles," he corrected gently. "Please call me Miles. I think pulling someone half-frozen from a mountainside puts us on a first-name basis, don't you?" This time, her smile was genuine, lighting up her entire face. "Miles, then, and I'm Catherine." "Catherine," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. "Tell me about Boston. What brings a city woman all the way out to the Dakota Territory?" She hesitated, toying with the fringe of the shawl Mrs. Holloway had lent her. "I needed a fresh start," she finally said. "Boston held difficult memories." Miles nodded, understanding all too well the desire to leave the past behind. Hadn't he done the same when he'd left Philadelphia 8 years ago, after Elizabeth had broken their engagement to marry his wealthier cousin? "Well," he said, raising his glass of whiskey in a small toast, "to fresh starts." Catherine raised her own glass of sherry. "To fresh starts," she echoed, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a connection formed in the recognition of shared experience, though neither knew yet the details of the other's past. As December settled over the Black Hills, Catherine's recovery continued apace. Soon she was joining Miles for rides around the property, bundled in borrowed coats and scarves against the winter cold. He showed her the silver mine that had made his fortune, now operated by a crew of 20 men who lived in cabins nearby. "It was pure luck," he told her as they surveyed the operation from horseback. "I was tracking a wounded elk and stumbled upon an outcropping of rock that caught my eye. 6 months later, I had enough silver to buy this land and build the ranch I'd always wanted." "You were a hunter before becoming a mine owner?" Catherine asked, genuinely interested in his past. Miles nodded. "Among other things. I've been a lot of things in my life: cowhand, army scout, hunter, guide. The mining was accidental. And the ranching." Miles smiled, looking out over the snow-covered pastures where his cattle were wintering. "That was the dream all along. My father was a banker in Philadelphia. I was supposed to follow in his footsteps, but I always wanted open spaces, room to breathe." Catherine studied him with new understanding. "So you came west to find freedom?" "I did," he admitted. "Though I didn't know that's what I was looking for at the time. I thought I was just running away." "From what?" she asked softly. Miles hesitated, then decided on honesty. "A woman. She chose someone else, and I couldn't bear to stay and watch them build a life together." Catherine nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I understand more than you might think. Before Miles could ask what she meant, a shout from the mine entrance drew their attention. One of the workers was waving urgently, and Miles immediately spurred his horse forward, calling back to Catherine to stay put. She watched as he dismounted and disappeared into the mine shaft with the worker. Long minutes passed, and she found herself growing anxious. Just as she was considering following, despite his instructions, Miles emerged, supporting a man whose face was streaked with blood. Catherine quickly dismounted and rushed to help, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind the injured man's bleeding head. "Cave in," she asked Miles as they worked together to stop the bleeding. He looked at her with surprise, either at her question or her quick action. "Yes, a small one. Johnson here was the only one near that section, thank God." "I've seen mining accidents before," she explained, tying off the makeshift bandage. "My father worked for a company that invested in copper mines in Michigan. I visited once as a child." Miles gave her an appreciative nod before turning his attention back to the injured miner. "Let's get him back to the ranch. Mrs. Holloway can take a better look at that cut." Together they helped Johnson onto Miles's horse, and Miles led the animal while Catherine followed on her borrowed mare. As they walked, Miles found himself constantly glancing back at her, seeing her in a new light. Not only was she beautiful and intelligent, but she was also practical and quick-thinking, in a crisis rare qualities in anyone, man or woman. Back at the ranch, Mrs. Holloway took charge of Johnson's care while Miles and Catherine warmed themselves with coffee in the kitchen. "You surprised me out there," Miles admitted. "Most women I know would have fainted at the sight of so much blood." Catherine smiled wryly. "I'm not most women, I'm afraid. My mother always said my practical nature would make it hard to find a husband." "Your mother sounds like she has traditional views," Miles observed. "Had," Catherine corrected softly. "She died 3 years ago. My father followed a year later." "I'm sorry," Miles said, genuinely sympathetic. "My own parents are gone as well. It's a lonely feeling." Catherine nodded, then seemed to make a decision. "Since we're sharing, I should tell you why I really left Boston." Miles set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "I was a governess for a prominent family," she began, her eyes fixed on the table. "The Harringtons. They had 3 children I was responsible for educating. Mr. Harrington was a banker like your father, and Mrs. Harrington was involved in every charitable organization in the city." She paused, visibly gathering courage before continuing. "They also had a son, Richard, home from Harvard for the summer. He developed an interest in me that I did not reciprocate. When I refused his advances, he became angry. One night he cornered me in the library." Miles felt a surge of protective anger, his hands unconsciously clenching into fists. "I fought him off," Catherine said quickly, seeing his reaction. "But in the struggle, an expensive vase was broken. When his parents came to investigate the noise, Richard claimed I had been the one to make improper advances, that I had thrown myself at him and become destructive when rejected." "They believed him," Miles guessed, his voice tight with indignation. Catherine nodded, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "Of course they did. He was their son, the heir to the family fortune. I was just a governess, a young woman of good education but no fortune or family connections to speak of." "So you were dismissed," Miles said, piecing together her story. "Worse," Catherine replied. "They spread rumors about me throughout Boston society. No respectable family would hire me after that. I tried to find work elsewhere, but the Harringtons' influence was far-reaching." "And that's when you saw the advertisement for Hill City," Miles concluded. "Yes. I spent nearly all I had on the stagecoach fare, hoping to start fresh where no one had heard of the Harringtons or their disgraced governess." Miles reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that surprised them both. "Their loss is Hill City's gain," he said firmly. "And I, for one, am glad you're here." The warmth in his eyes made Catherine's heart skip a beat. For the first time since the accident, perhaps even longer, she felt truly safe. The realization both comforted and frightened her. As Christmas approached, the weather cleared enough for Miles to take Catherine into Hill City. The sheriff had sent word that they needed to record her official statement about the stagecoach accident, and Miles thought it a good opportunity for her to see the town and inquire about the teaching position. The small frontier town was festive despite its rustic appearance, with pine boughs and red ribbons decorating the storefronts. Catherine took it all in with wide eyes as Miles helped her down from the wagon. "It's lovely," she said, adjusting her borrowed bonnet. "Smaller than I expected, but charming." Miles grinned, pleased by her positive reaction. "Wait until you see it in spring when the wildflowers bloom. Now, shall we see the sheriff first, or would you like to speak with the town council about the teaching position?" "The sheriff, I think," Catherine decided. "I'd like to fulfill that obligation before anything else." Miles admired her sense of duty. He offered his arm, which she took without hesitation, and guided her down the muddy main street toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor was a kind man in his 50s, who treated Catherine with gentle respect, as she recounted the details of the stagecoach accident. He showed appropriate solemnity when she described the immediate aftermath, how she had checked each passenger and the driver for signs of life, finding none, before attempting to make her way to the nearest settlement. "You showed remarkable courage, Miss Campbell," the sheriff said when she had finished her account. "We recovered the bodies last week, thanks to Mr. Ironwood's directions. They've been laid to rest in the town cemetery with proper ceremony." Catherine blinked back tears. "Thank you, Sheriff. I've been praying for their souls." After completing the formal statement, Miles suggested they visit the town council chairman next. "Samuel Porter runs the general store and heads the council," he explained as they walked. "He's the one who placed the advertisement for a teacher." Porter's general store was bustling with pre-Christmas shoppers when they arrived. The proprietor, a round-faced man with a jolly demeanor, brightened visibly when Miles introduced Catherine, the schoolteacher from Boston. "We'd given up hope after the stagecoach went missing," Porter exclaimed, pumping Catherine's hand enthusiastically. "When can you start? The children are running their poor mothers ragged without school to occupy them." Catherine smiled, warmed by his eager welcome. "I'm still recovering from my ordeal, Mr. Porter, but I could perhaps begin after the new year." "Perfect." Porter clapped his hands together. "The schoolhouse needs a good cleaning and some repairs, but we can have that done by then. The position comes with a small cabin behind the school, nothing fancy, mind you, but comfortable enough for a single lady." As Porter continued detailing the position, Miles found his attention wandering, his gaze fixed on Catherine's animated face. The prospect of her moving into town, away from his ranch, created an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. In just a few weeks, he had grown accustomed to her presence, to their conversations by the fire, to seeing her at his table each morning and evening. "Don't you agree, Mr. Ironwood?" Miles started, realizing Porter had asked him a question. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "I was saying Miss Campbell will need to acquire some basic supplies before starting books, writing materials, and such. Perhaps you could help her with transportation to Rapid City after Christmas. They have a much better selection there." "Of course," Miles agreed quickly. "It would be my pleasure." Catherine gave him a curious look, as though she had noticed his momentary distraction, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she finalized arrangements with Porter, agreeing to return after the holidays to inspect the schoolhouse and cabin. As they left the store, snow began to fall gently, adding to the festive atmosphere. Miles suggested lunch at the hotel dining room before heading back to the ranch, and Catherine readily agreed. The Hill City Hotel was the finest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much compared to Boston standards, but Catherine found its rustic charm appealing. The dining room was decorated with evergreen garlands, and a small tree stood in one corner, adorned with paper ornaments likely made by local children. "It's wonderful," Catherine said as they were seated at a table near the fireplace. "The whole town feels like a community, everyone working together." Miles nodded, pleased by her observation. "That's what drew me to stay in this area. People look out for each other here. It's not perfect nowheres, but there's a genuine spirit of cooperation." Their meal was simple but delicious venison stew with fresh bread and apple pie for dessert. As they ate, Catherine noticed several townsfolk casting curious glances their way, some even nudging their companions and whispering. "I believe we're causing quite a stir," she murmured to Miles, who looked around and chuckled. "Small towns run on gossip," he explained. "And I'm afraid I've just provided them with excellent fodder by bringing a beautiful woman to lunch." Catherine blushed at the compliment. "Is it unusual for you to dine with a woman in town?" "It's unusual for me to dine with anyone in town," Miles admitted. "I'm not known for being particularly sociable. Some call me a hermit, though I prefer selective in my associations." Catherine laughed, a sound that Miles found increasingly addictive. "Well, I'm honored to be selected then." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of growing feelings that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The moment was interrupted when the hotel owner's wife approached their table. "Mr. Ironwood, Miss Campbell," she greeted them warmly. "I'm Martha Wilson. My husband and I run the hotel." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wilson," Catherine replied with a genuine smile. "I wanted to personally invite you both to our Christmas Eve gathering," Mrs. Wilson continued. "We host it every year for the town. There's music, dancing, plenty of food. It would be lovely to officially welcome our new school teacher." Catherine looked to Miles, uncertain. "That's very kind, but I'm still a guest at Mr. Ironwood's ranch. I wouldn't want to presume." "We'd be delighted to attend," Miles said, surprising himself with the easy acceptance. He typically avoided such social gatherings, but the thought of seeing Catherine enjoy herself among the townspeople was strangely appealing. Mrs. Wilson beamed. "Wonderful. We'll expect you both at 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve then." After she left, Catherine gave Miles a quizzical look. "You don't strike me as someone who enjoys town dances." Miles grinned sheepishly. "I'm not usually, but it's Christmas and you should have the opportunity to meet more of the community before you start teaching their children." Catherine studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. "Thank you. I think I would like that very much." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, with the snow falling more heavily around them. Miles had wrapped Catherine in extra blankets before they set out, and she sat close beside him on the wagon seat, their shoulders touching. Neither seemed inclined to speak, content in the comfortable silence as the horses trudged steadily through the gathering snow. When they arrived back at the ranch, Miles helped Catherine down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, her cheeks pink from more than just the cold. "Thank you for today," she said as they walked toward the house. "For everything." Miles wanted to tell her that these past weeks had been the happiest he could remember in years, that the thought of her leaving for her own cabin in town filled him with a sense of loss he hadn't expected. Instead, he simply said, "It was my pleasure, Catherine." That night, as he lay in bed listening to the wind howling outside, Miles admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for days. He was falling in love with Catherine Campbell. The realization both exhilarated and terrified him. After Elizabeth's rejection, he had guarded his heart carefully, convinced he was better off alone. But Catherine was different, stronger, more genuine, with a quiet courage that humbled him. The question was, did she feel anything similar for him? And if she did, what then? She had come to Dakota Territory for independence, for a fresh start. Would she welcome his feelings, or see them as an impediment to the freedom she sought? These thoughts kept him awake long into the night, the answers as elusive as the stars hidden behind the storm clouds outside. In the days leading up to Christmas, the ranch bustled with activity. Mrs. Holloway insisted on a proper celebration, citing Catherine's presence as reason enough to do things right for once. Miles found himself drawn into the preparations, hauling in a massive pine tree for the sitting room and retrieving ornaments from storage that hadn't seen daylight in years. Catherine threw herself into the festivities with enthusiasm, helping Mrs. Holloway bake cookies and pies, fashioning new ornaments from paper and ribbons, and even convincing Jeremiah to teach her how to make popcorn strings for the tree. Miles watched her one afternoon as she sat by the window, carefully threading popcorn onto a string, her face serene in the winter light. He was struck by how naturally she fit into his home, as though she had always belonged there. "You're staring, Mr. Ironwood, Mrs. Holloway remarked quietly as she passed him with a basket of laundry. Miles started, embarrassed at being caught. "I was just thinking." The housekeeper gave him a knowing look. "She's a fine young woman, smart, pretty, kind-hearted. You could do a lot worse." Before Miles could respond, she continued down the hallway, leaving him to consider her words. Was he that transparent? And if Mrs. Holloway had noticed his feelings, had Catherine as well? Christmas Eve arrived with a break in the weather, the skies clearing to reveal a brilliant blue expanse above the snow-covered landscape. Miles spent the morning with his ranch hands, ensuring the livestock were well tended before the evening's festivities. When he returned to the house, he found Catherine in the sitting room, admiring their decorated tree. "It's beautiful," she said without turning, somehow knowing it was him who had entered. "I don't think I've ever seen a more perfect Christmas tree." Miles moved to stand beside her, close enough that their arms almost touched. "My sister and I used to decorate the tree together when we were children. It was always my favorite part of Christmas." Catherine turned to look at him, her blue eyes reflecting the pine boughs. "You've mentioned your sister before. Does she live far away?" "San Francisco," Miles nodded. "She married a shipping merchant. They have 3 children now." "You must miss her," Catherine said softly. Miles smiled, touched by her perception. "I do, but she's happy there." Sometimes loving someone means letting them go where they need to be. Something flickered in Catherine's eyes at his words, recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding. But before she could respond, Mrs. Holloway appeared to announce that lunch was ready. The afternoon passed quickly as they prepared for the town dance. Miles had arranged for Jeremiah to drive them in the sleigh, a concession to the still deep snow and Catherine's continuing recovery. When it came time to depart, Miles waited at the foot of the stairs, nervously adjusting his seldom-worn tie. The sound of a door opening upstairs drew his attention, and when Catherine appeared at the top of the staircase, Miles forgot to breathe. She wore a deep blue dress that Mrs. Holloway had altered from one of his sister's old gowns, the color perfectly matching her eyes. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few curls framing her face. "You look—" Miles struggled to find adequate words. Beautiful doesn't seem sufficient." Catherine blushed, descending the stairs with careful steps. "Mrs. Holloway worked wonders with the dress. I can never repay her kindness." "Nonsense," the housekeeper said from the doorway, beaming with pride. "It was a pleasure to see that fabric put to good use instead of sitting in a trunk. Now go on, you two. Enjoy yourselves." The sleigh ride to town was magical, with the moon illuminating the snow-covered landscape and stars scattered across the velvet sky. Miles had tucked a heated brick wrapped in flannel by Catherine's feet and ensured she was bundled in the warmest lap robe. Still, the cold gave her a perfect excuse to sit close beside him, their shoulders and hips touching beneath the heavy buffalo robe. "I've never been to a Christmas Eve dance," Catherine admitted as they glided over the snow. "In Boston, my family attended midnight church service, then returned home for hot chocolate before bed." "No dancing at all?" Miles asked, surprised. Catherine shook her head. "My father didn't approve of dancing. He considered it frivolous." Miles grinned mischievously. "Then I'm particularly glad you'll experience it tonight. There's nothing quite like a frontier Christmas celebration." The hotel was transformed when they arrived. The main room cleared of tables to create a dance floor, with greenery and red ribbons adorning every surface. A small group of musicians, a fiddler, a banjo player, and an accordion player were setting up in one corner, while long tables along the walls held a remarkable array of food contributed by the townspeople. Mrs. Wilson spotted them immediately and hurried over to welcome them. "Miss Campbell, Mr. Ironwood, we're so pleased you could come. Everyone is eager to meet our new schoolteacher." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions as Catherine was presented to what seemed like the entire population of Hill City. Miles stayed close by her side, providing names and context when needed, his hand occasionally resting lightly on the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. When the music began, Miles turned to Catherine with a formal bow. "May I have this dance, Miss Campbell?" Catherine hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced. My dancing lessons were limited to a few basic steps." Miles took her hand gently in his. "Then we'll learn together." The dance was a simple waltz, and after a few awkward starts, Catherine found her rhythm, following Miles's lead with increasing confidence. He was a surprisingly good dancer for a man who claimed to avoid social gatherings, and Catherine told him so. "My mother insisted on proper lessons," he explained, guiding her through a turn. "She said no son of hers would embarrass himself or his partner on a dance floor, regardless of how infrequently he might use the skill." Catherine laughed, relaxing further into his arms. She was a wise woman. As the evening progressed, Catherine danced with several other men, Mr. Porter, the sheriff, and a few of the mine workers Miles had introduced her to. But she found her eyes continually seeking out Miles across the room, and more often than not, discovered him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. During a break in the dancing, while Catherine was chatting with a group of mothers about their children's educational needs, Miles stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night air was crisp and cold, a welcome relief from the warmth of the crowded room. He leaned against the porch railing, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Escaping already," came Catherine's voice from behind him. "And here I thought cowboys were supposed to have stamina." Miles turned to find her standing in the doorway, a playful smile on her lips. She had draped a shawl around her shoulders as protection against the cold. "Just getting some air," he replied, returning her smile. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Catherine moved to stand beside him at the railing. "Very much. Everyone has been so welcoming. I think I'm going to be happy here." The simple statement brought both joy and sadness to Miles. Happy in Hill City, but not necessarily at his ranch, not with him. "I'm glad," he said softly. "You deserve happiness, Catherine." She turned to look at him, her expression suddenly serious. "So do you, Miles." The way she said his name, with such gentle emphasis, made something tighten in his chest. They stood there in silence for a long moment, the sounds of music and laughter drifting out from the hotel, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Miles gathered his courage. "Catherine, but before he could continue, the door opened behind them and Mrs. Wilson appeared. "There you are. The children are about to perform their Christmas song, and they insisted the new teacher must be present." Catherine gave Miles an apologetic look before allowing Mrs. Wilson to usher her back inside. Miles followed more slowly, the words he had been about to say still burning on his tongue. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. The children's performance was followed by community carol singing, then more dancing, and finally a midnight toast to Christmas Day. Throughout it all, Miles and Catherine exchanged glances that seemed increasingly weighted with meaning, but found no opportunity for private conversation. It was nearly 1 in the morning when they finally bid farewell to their hosts and climbed back into the sleigh for the journey home. Catherine was quieter now, whether from fatigue or the intensity of what had almost been said on the porch. Miles couldn't tell. As they traveled through the silent, moonlit landscape, Catherine suddenly spoke. "What were you going to say?" Earlier on the porch before Mrs. Wilson interrupted. Miles took a deep breath, his exhale visible in the cold air. This was his moment, perhaps his only chance before she moved into town and built a life separate from him. "I was going to say that these past weeks, having you at the ranch, have been the happiest I can remember in a very long time," he began, his voice low but steady. "And the thought of you leaving, even if it's just to town, makes me realize how empty my life was before you came into it." He paused, gauging her reaction. Catherine was watching him intently, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I know you came here for independence, for a fresh start," he continued. "And I would never want to stand in the way of that. But I find myself hoping that perhaps your new beginning might include me there." It was said. Not a declaration of love, it was too soon for that, but an acknowledgement of feelings, an opening of possibilities. Catherine was silent for so long that Miles began to fear he had misread everything, had imagined the connection between them. Then she reached out and placed her gloved hand over his where it rested on the reins. "When I was lost in the mountains," she said quietly, "I was certain I would die there. I had given up hope. And then you found me, carried me down from that cold, lonely place. Not just physically, Miles. In every way that matters." She turned slightly to face him better. "I did come here seeking independence, but I've discovered that independence doesn't have to mean being alone. Perhaps we could discover where this leads together." Relief and joy surged through Miles. He brought the sleigh to a halt beneath a canopy of stars, setting the reins aside to take both her hands in his. "I would like that very much, Catherine Campbell," he said softly, before leaning forward to press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was brief, tender, a promise of more to come. When they parted, Catherine's eyes were shining with unshed tears, happy ones. Miles hoped. "Merry Christmas, Miles Ironwood," she whispered. Miles smiled, touching his forehead to hers. "Merry Christmas, Catherine." They returned to the ranch with hearts lighter than when they had left. The future suddenly full of possibilities neither had dared imagine just weeks before. Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, the sunlight reflecting off the snow with dazzling intensity. Miles woke earlier than usual, his mind immediately filled with memories of the previous night's confession and kiss. He dressed quickly and made his way downstairs, hoping to see Catherine before breakfast. He found her in the sitting room, already dressed in a simple day dress, arranging small packages beneath the Christmas tree. She looked up at his entrance, a shy smile spreading across her face. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," he replied, crossing the room to stand before her. After last night, he wasn't entirely sure of the protocol between them. Should he kiss her again? Take her hand. Catherine solved his dilemma by rising on tiptoe to place a quick, soft kiss on his cheek. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the packages. "I made a few small gifts, nothing elaborate, I'm afraid." Miles was touched by her thoughtfulness. "Of course I don't mind. I have something for you as well, though I was planning to give it to you privately." Before Catherine could respond, Mrs. Holloway bustled in, carrying a tray of coffee. "Merry Christmas, you too. Breakfast will be ready in 15 minutes. I've made those cinnamon rolls you're so fond of, Mr. Ironwood." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." "Everything smells wonderful," Miles said, noting the knowing look the housekeeper gave them as she set down the tray and departed. "I believe Mrs. Holloway suspects something has changed between us," Catherine observed with amusement once they were alone again. Miles chuckled, pouring them each a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Holloway knows everything that happens on this ranch before it happens. I wouldn't be surprised if she had predicted our feelings for each other before we recognized them ourselves." Catherine accepted the coffee with a smile. "She's been so kind to me. Everyone has. I never expected such warmth and acceptance when I decided to come west. The people here value sincerity and hard work above all else," Miles said, "and you've demonstrated both in abundance." They spent the morning exchanging gifts with Mrs. Holloway and Jeremiah, enjoying a leisurely breakfast, and then gathering in the sitting room where Catherine had arranged for them all to read aloud from Dickens's A Christmas Carol, taking turns with different characters. It was mid-afternoon when Miles finally found an opportunity to give Catherine his gift in private. He found her in the library, browsing the shelves with evident pleasure. "Your collection is impressive," she remarked as he entered. "I wouldn't have expected such literary wealth in a frontier ranch. Books were my first companions out here," Miles explained. "When I built this house, the library was the room I planned most carefully." Catherine ran her fingers along the leather-bound spines. "It shows. You have everything from Greek philosophy to modern novels." Miles moved closer, pulling a small package from his pocket. "I have something for you. It's not much, but when I saw it in Rapid City last month, I thought it was beautiful. Of course, I had no idea then who might receive it." Catherine unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a snowflake, set with tiny blue stones that matched her eyes. "Miles," she breathed, looking up at him with wonder. "It's exquisite." "Like the snow that brought you to me," he said softly. "Though I hope this reminder of it brings only joy, not memories of your ordeal." Catherine touched the brooch gently. "It will remind me of being found, not of being lost." She pinned it carefully to her dress, then reached into her pocket. "I have something for you as well, though it pales in comparison." She handed him a small cloth-wrapped object. Miles unwrapped it to find a carved wooden compass, clearly fashioned by hand, with a small piece of polished silver serving as the needle. "I asked Jeremiah to help me," Catherine explained. "The silver is from your mine. He showed me how to polish it. I thought, well, you found your way to me in the mountains. Perhaps this might always help you find your way home." Miles was speechless, deeply moved by the thoughtful gift. The hours of work it must have taken, the care in its creation, spoke volumes. "Catherine," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion, This is the most meaningful gift I've ever received, she smiled, relieved by his reaction. Truly, it's so simple compared to your beautiful brooch. Miles shook his head, closing his hand around the compass. Not simple, perfect. He leaned down to kiss her then, no longer hesitant, and Catherine responded with equal feeling, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain, a confirmation of the path they had chosen to explore together. When they finally parted, Miles kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I was so afraid I'd lose you to Hill City," he confessed quietly. Catherine pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "You won't lose me, Miles, but I still need to teach. It's not just work to me, it's a calling." "I know," Miles assured her. "I would never ask you to give that up, but perhaps we could find a compromise." Catherine raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What sort of compromise?" Miles took a deep breath, knowing he was about to suggest something that would change both their lives irrevocably. "What if you lived here at the ranch and traveled to town each day to teach? I could take you in the mornings and fetch you in the afternoons, at least until spring when the roads improve." Catherine's eyes widened at the suggestion. "You would do that? Drive me to and from town every day?" "I would," Miles confirmed. "And in better weather you could ride yourself if you preferred. The distance isn't great." "But what would people say?" Catherine worried. "An unmarried woman living at a bachelor's ranch." Miles grinned. "Well, Mrs. Holloway serves as a perfectly respectable chaperone." "But if propriety is your concern—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "There is another solution." Catherine's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. "Miles, are you—" "Not proposing," he clarified quickly. "Not yet. It's too soon for both of us. But I am suggesting that we consider that possibility in the future, if our feelings continue to grow as they have been." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Catherine's expression. "That's very sensible," Miles laughed softly. "I'm not known for being sensible where my heart is concerned, Catherine. If I were, I'd already be on one knee, but I respect you too much to rush this. I want you to be certain, to have time to know your own mind and heart." Catherine's smile returned, warm and genuine. "Thank you for that. And yes, I think your compromise is a good one for now. I'll stay here and travel to town to teach." The decision made, they sealed it with another kiss, this one filled with promise for the future they would build together. January brought heavy snows that made travel difficult, but not impossible. True to his word, Miles drove Catherine to the schoolhouse each morning and collected her each afternoon. The town quickly grew accustomed to seeing them together, and if there were whispers about their arrangement, they were generally good-natured. Catherine thrived as Hill City's teacher. The one-room schoolhouse held 27 students ranging from 5 to 16 years of age, a diverse group that included the children of miners, shopkeepers, and ranchers. Her firm but kind approach to education quickly earned her the respect of both pupils and parents. Miles, for his part, found himself reorganizing his days around Catherine's schedule, a change he embraced wholeheartedly. He attended town meetings he would have previously avoided, joined Catherine for lunch at the hotel cafe on occasion, and even helped repair the schoolhouse roof when a heavy snow caused damage. February brought Valentine's Day, which Miles marked by having a special dinner prepared at the ranch and presenting Catherine with a rare volume of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets he had ordered from Denver. Catherine, in turn, had knitted him a scarf in the hours after her students had left for the day, working on it secretly while pretending to grade papers. As winter gradually gave way to spring, their relationship deepened. They shared stories of their pasts: Miles's disastrous engagement to Elizabeth, Catherine's struggles after her parents' deaths, their mutual love of literature and music. They discovered differences as well. Miles preferred solitude and open spaces, while Catherine enjoyed the social aspects of town life. But these differences complemented rather than divided them. By April, wildflowers had begun to carpet the lower meadows, just as Miles had promised Catherine months before. One Saturday, he suggested a picnic to show her his favorite spot, a small plateau overlooking a valley that would soon be filled with blooms. The day was perfect: warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and clear skies. They rode on horseback, Catherine now comfortable enough on her mare to navigate the gentle trails without difficulty. Miles had packed a basket with cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine, all carefully prepared by Mrs. Holloway, who had given him a significant look when he requested the picnic supplies. When they reached the plateau, Catherine gasped at the view: rolling hills stretching to distant mountains, patches of yellow and purple wildflowers beginning to spread across the landscape, and a small creek winding through the valley below. "It's magnificent," she breathed, dismounting with Miles's assistance. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." Miles smiled, pleased by her reaction. "It gets better every year. By May, the entire valley will be a sea of color." They spread a blanket on a grassy spot and enjoyed their meal, talking easily about Catherine's students and Miles's plans for expanding the ranch. After they had eaten, Miles suggested a short walk to the edge of the plateau for an even better view. As they stood side by side, looking out over the Dakota landscape, Miles took Catherine's hand in his. 6 months had passed since he had found her half frozen in the mountains. 6 months of growing closeness, of shared experiences, of falling in love. "Catherine," he began, his voice suddenly serious, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the blue of the spring sky. "Mine too, Miles." Drawing a deep breath, Miles reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Catherine's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "I know we agreed to wait," Miles said, "and if you're not ready, I understand, but I can't imagine my life without you now. You've brought light and warmth to places inside me I thought would always remain cold and dark." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a perfect sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in white gold. "Catherine Campbell, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Miles Ironwood. Yes, I will marry you." Miles slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that conveyed all the joy and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Catherine looked down at the ring glittering on her hand. "It's beautiful." "How did you know my size?" Miles grinned. "Mrs. Holloway. She measured your finger while you were sleeping one night, said she was checking your temperature." Catherine laughed, not at all surprised by the housekeeper's subterfuge. "I should have known she was involved." "She's been dropping hints about wedding plans for weeks." "She has?" Miles asked, surprised. "She's been remarkably subtle with me." "That's because she knew you'd make the decision in your own time," Catherine said wisely. "She just wanted to be prepared when you did." They spent the rest of the afternoon on the plateau, making plans for their wedding and their life together. They would continue to live at the ranch, with Catherine teaching in town. They talked of children, of expanding the house, of travels they might take to San Francisco to visit Miles's sister and her family. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, they reluctantly packed up and mounted their horses for the ride home. Catherine looked back once at the plateau, committing the scene to memory. "We'll come back," Miles promised, reading her thoughts. "Year after year to mark this day." Catherine smiled, her heart full. "I'd like that." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Hill City. The townspeople, who had watched their romance unfold over the winter months, were universally delighted. Mrs. Wilson immediately offered the hotel for the wedding reception, while Mr. Porter insisted on ordering special decorations from Rapid City at his own expense. Catherine and Miles set the date for June 10th, when the wildflowers would be at their peak and the weather most reliable. Mrs. Holloway took charge of wedding preparations with military efficiency, drawing up lists and delegating tasks to ensure everything would be perfect. Catherine continued teaching, though her students were often distracted by her sapphire ring and full of questions about the upcoming wedding. Miles found himself unexpectedly busy as well, as he had decided to surprise Catherine by adding a second story to the east wing of the ranch house, creating a private suite for them with a view of the mountains where they had first met. May passed in a blur of activity. Catherine's students presented her with a handmade quilt as an early wedding gift, each child contributing a square that represented something they had learned from her. Miles's sister, Margaret, arrived from San Francisco with her husband and children, filling the ranch with noise and laughter that Catherine found delightful. The day before the wedding, Catherine stood in what would soon be their bedroom suite, admiring Miles's handiwork. The room was spacious and filled with light from large windows that overlooked the distant mountains. He had commissioned a beautiful cherrywood bed and dresser from a craftsman in Rapid City, and the walls were painted a soft blue that reminded Catherine of the sky on the day of their engagement. "Do you like it?" Miles asked from the doorway, watching her reaction anxiously. Catherine turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's perfect, absolutely perfect." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Tomorrow you'll be Mrs. Ironwood." "Yes," she agreed, lifting her face for his kiss. "And you'll be stuck with a stubborn schoolteacher for the rest of your life." Miles laughed softly against her lips. "I can think of worse fates." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, as if nature itself approved of their union. The ceremony was held in the town's small church, which was filled to capacity with well-wishers. Catherine wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Holloway and Margaret had worked on together, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to Miles's mother. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of Sheriff Taylor, who had volunteered to give her away in the absence of her father, Catherine's eyes were fixed on Miles. He stood tall and handsome at the altar, his usually casual demeanor transformed by a formal suit and the solemn importance of the occasion. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices steady and sure as they promised to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Miles kissed Catherine with such tenderness that many in the congregation were moved to tears. The reception at the hotel was a joyous affair that lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, speeches and toasts, and so much goodwill that Catherine felt almost overwhelmed by it. This community that had welcomed her so warmly was now truly her home, these people her extended family. As the celebration continued around them, Miles led Catherine out onto the hotel's back porch for a moment of quiet. "Happy, Mrs. Ironwood?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they looked up at the star-filled sky. "Completely," she assured him, leaning back against his chest. "I was thinking about that night in December when we stood out here and you almost told me how you felt." Miles pressed a kiss to her temple. "I was so afraid you wouldn't feel the same way." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I opened my eyes and saw you sitting beside me after you rescued me, I just didn't recognize it then. And now? Miles asked, his voice husky with emotion. Now I know that finding you, or rather, you finding me, was the greatest blessing of my life, Catherine replied. You carried me down from that mountain and straight into a future I never dared dream of. Miles kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their wedding vows and the passion of their love for each other. When they finally parted, breathless, he whispered, "Let's go home, wife." Catherine nodded, her heart too full for words. Together, they slipped away from the celebration and rode in the moonlight to the ranch that was now truly their home, beginning the journey of their married life, just as they had begun their love under a canopy of stars in the vast Dakota sky. 5 years later, Catherine stood on the plateau where Miles had proposed, watching as their 3-year-old son, James, chased butterflies through the wildflowers while Miles carried their infant daughter, Elizabeth, in a sling across his chest. The years had been good to them. Catherine continued to teach in Hill City, though now only 3 days a week, allowing her more time with their growing family. Miles had expanded the ranch and the mine, becoming one of the territory's most successful businessmen, though he cared far more about his role as husband and father than any financial achievement. "Careful near the edge, James," Catherine called as the boy ventured closer to the plateau's drop-off. "I've got him," Miles assured her, easily catching up to their energetic son and swinging him onto his shoulders, much to James's delight. Catherine smiled, her heart full as she watched them. Sometimes she still marveled at how her life had changed from that terrible day in the mountains. What had seemed like the end had actually been the beginning of everything good in her life. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Miles asked, returning to her side with James still perched on his shoulders and Elizabeth sleeping peacefully against his chest. "About how sometimes we have to get lost to be found," Catherine replied, reaching up to touch his cheek tenderly. "And how grateful I am that you found me, Miles Ironwood." Miles leaned down to kiss her, their children a living testament to the love that had blossomed between a half-frozen woman and the cowboy who had carried her down from the mountains and into his heart. "I'll always find you, Catherine," he promised against her lips. "Always." And as they stood together on the plateau overlooking the valley filled with wildflowers, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, with the family she loved, in the beautiful, wild land that had nearly taken her life, but had instead given her everything worth living for.